I want you to just think about a physical book for a second. It might literally be sitting on the highest shelf in your home right now.
Yeah, probably carefully wrapped up in a velvet cloth, right?
Exactly, yeah. Or maybe it's, the book you see intricately displayed at weddings.
Oh, absolutely.
The one whose verses you hear rhythmically chanted over loudspeakers during times of mourning. And honestly, even if you don't speak the language, you know the cadence of the words.
Right, it has that very specific sound.
You know the exact sound of them.
Yeah.
And there's a very high chance that you, or people you know, might recite these verses hoping for this profound sense of peace.
Yeah, people recite them for a bit of spiritual comfort or to acquire what society generally calls, a blessing.
Right. You treat it as a sanctuary, like an escape from the brutal, grinding realities of the physical world.
Which is, it is the ultimate human instinct, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
When the world outside is chaotic or unjust and just economically terrifying, we retreat inward. We build these psychological cloisters.
Like little private sanctuaries.
Exactly. These private sanctuaries of ritual, because the alternative, actually confronting the worldly tyrannies raging outside our doors, is terrifying.
It is.
It requires a level of collective sacrifice that, frankly, most people simply aren't prepared to make.
Right, exactly. But what if I told you that this entire paradigm is a trap?
A huge trap.
What if the very text you've been treating is this private, mystical collection of rituals, like a book of spiritual placebos to help you tolerate an unjust world, is actually a fiercely practical, highly technical civilizational blueprint demanding the exact opposite?
Yeah.
Like, what if it's an operational manual specifically engineered to completely dismantle that unjust world?
See, that is a staggering conceptual leap for most people to make.
It really is.
Because you are asking someone to take a text that billions of human beings interact with on a strictly emotional, devotional level and realize they might have been reading a structural engineering manual as if it were a book of romantic poetry.
Oh, wow. That's a great way to put it.
Right. And if you try to build a suspension bridge using the emotional interpretations of a poem, that bridge is going to collapse the second you put any real weight on it.
Yeah, it's just going to fall apart.
And historically speaking, that is exactly what has happened to the societies that misread this text.
Okay, so let's unpack this blueprint. Because today, on this deep dive, we are stripping away centuries, and I mean literally centuries, of mystical, ritualistic overlays.
We have to. It's the only way to see what's actually there.
Right. We are diving deep into the rationalist, radically systemic framework of Allama G.A. Parwez. And specifically, we are looking through his lens at a very precise section of the Quran, which is Surah Al-Imran, verses 152 through 158.
Yeah, fascinating section.
Under Parwez's analytical framework, these verses have absolutely nothing to do with passive theology. They aren't about sitting in a room and meditating.
Not at all.
They are this masterclass in radical socioeconomic justice, collective human psychology, and centralized military discipline. We are looking at the historical battle of Uhud, not as some miraculous religious fable, but as a forensic case study in how a society survives a catastrophic systemic failure.
And to truly understand the sheer gravity of what Parwez is analyzing here, we really have to recognize the stakes.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The Battle of Uhud wasn't just, a clash of swords in the desert. It was the ultimate existential stress test of a newly formed social contract.
Right.
The text refers to this collective society as a millat, and the survival of this millat didn't depend on angels descending from the clouds.
Which is how it's often taught, right?
Exactly, but it didn't. It depended entirely on economics, psychology, and the raw, unyielding mechanics of human discipline.
But before we can even step onto that battlefield, Parwez insists that we have a massive, fundamental translation problem.
Yes, a huge one.
And I don't just mean translating from Arabic to English. I mean a conceptual translation problem. If we approach this systemic manual using the vocabulary of a cloistered priesthood, we're going to fail to build the machine.
Yeah, the vocabulary changes everything.
To use an analogy, it's like looking at the underlying code of a massive, interconnected computer operating system and mistakenly thinking it's just a single, isolated app for, meditation.
That operating system analogy is the perfect key to unlock this entire framework. Because the very first thing Parwez does is draw a massive, uncompromising line in the sand between two concepts.
Mazhab and Deen.
Exactly, Mazhab and Deen. Traditionally, in everyday conversation, people use both of these words interchangeably to mean religion.
Yeah, they just blend them together.
But in this rationalist analysis, confusing the two is the root cause of civilizational collapse.
Okay, let's break down the app first. Let's talk about Mazhab.
Right. So Madhab is the app. It is the traditional, widely accepted concept of religion. It consists of private rituals, dogmas, personal piety, and individual salvation.
So it's very me-focused.
Completely. In a madhab, your relationship is strictly vertical between you and a deity. It is entirely divorced from politics, from macroeconomics, from statecraft, and from social justice.
Wow.
You can be deeply religious in a madhab while your neighbor starves.
Or while a tyrant strips away the rights of the working class.
Exactly, because those are worldly issues, right?
Yeah.
And your focus is supposedly on the spiritual realm.
Which creates this incredibly convenient vacuum in the physical world. I mean, if all the good, moral people are entirely focused on their private spiritual salvation, who is running the actual society?
Exactly. Who is making the economic policies?
Right. And history shows us exactly who fills that vacuum.
Yep. Oppressive, individualistic systems. Parwez argues that madhab is incredibly dangerous because it actively justifies earthly kingship, what is called mulukiyat, as well as elite capitalist monopolies.
It just lets them off the hook.
It really does. It empowers tyrants to rule the physical world with an iron fist, while an oppressive priesthood manages the spiritual world.
Thus keeping the masses sedated.
Yep. Keeping them completely sedated with promises of a better life after they die. It's the ultimate divide and conquer strategy.
The tyrant takes your wealth and your labor, the priest takes your critical thinking, and together they just maintain the status quo.
It's the classic render unto Caesar what is Caesar's divide. And Parwez's framework completely rejects this.
Well, it really throws it out.
Right. According to this rationalist reading of the text, the Quran is not outlining a madhab, it is outlining Deen.
The operating system.
Yes, and Deen is the entire operating system. It is a comprehensive, unified, fiercely practical socioeconomic and political state governed by divine law.
So it covers literally everything.
Everything. In Deen, there is absolutely zero separation between the secular and the religious. Economic equity, resource distribution, and political administration aren't just secondary good ideas.
Like they aren't just charity.
Exactly. They are the absolute highest forms of obedience to the system.
This is where the paradigm shift really hits you.
Yeah.
Because if Deen is a geopolitical state system, then the concept of God in this framework isn't some, petty dictator in the sky demanding arbitrary chants and physical postures to stroke his ego.
Not at all.
The divine law is the ultimate, inviolable constitutional authority. And its singular driving purpose is to dismantle worldly tyrannies and establish universal structural justice for every single human being.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay, but let me ask you this. If we redefine Deen as a functional state system that completely shatters our traditional image of the people who lead it,
It really does.
like what does that make the Rasul or the Imam? Because when society hears those titles, we instinctively picture a very specific archetype.
Right, the cloistered holy man.
Yeah, we picture a soft-spoken, cloistered preacher, someone sitting quietly in a dimly lit mosque, leading prayers, maybe doling out gentle spiritual advice to individuals facing personal crises.
Right, the traditional image is almost entirely passive. It's someone who is detached from the brutal friction of the real world. But Parwez's analysis of Surah Al-Imran entirely annihilates this ascetic, priest-like model. In the system of Deen, the central authority, which the text calls the markaz, functions as the supreme military commander.
Oh, wow.
They are the head of state, the chief economist, and the master strategic administrator.
So they aren't burning incense. They are managing a state treasury.
Yes.
They're negotiating complex geopolitical treaties and literally moving troops on a battlefield.
Precisely. The markaz is the operational hub. They are the central nervous system of the collective. They are the physical, active embodiment of the system's compassion and mercy.
But it's not a soft mercy, is it?
No, it's not a passive, sentimental mercy. It is a fiercely protective, structural mercy. Think of them as a highly engaged shepherd.
Okay, I like that.
A shepherd doesn't just sit on a rock and pray for the sheep while wolves are actively slaughtering the flock.
Right, there would be a terrible shepherd.
Exactly. The shepherd stands up, takes a staff, and physically fights off the wolves. The markaz prioritizes the sociopolitical welfare of the millat above their own comfort, and in a crisis, they become the unifying lighthouse.
That lighthouse image fundamentally changes how you view historical events. When you see the Markaz standing on the front lines of a brutal battle, you realize this isn't about personal piety.
No, it's about structural survival.
Right, which beautifully bridges us into the third major conceptual translation we really need to make today, the concept of iman.
Ah, yes, Iman.
Historically, we translate iman simply as faith or belief. It's often framed as believing in something you cannot see, specifically without requiring empirical evidence.
Right, it's almost framed as a virtue to believe blindly.
Exactly. And Parwez argues that defining iman as blind faith is a fatal corruption of the original Arabic.
It completely misses the point.
In the framework of Deen, iman is the complete opposite of passive blind belief. It is defined as intense intellectual conviction in the validity and justice of the divine laws.
But crucially, it does not stop at the intellect.
Right.
If you say you believe in the system, but you do nothing to enact it, you don't actually have Iman.
So it's intellectual conviction that must organically translate into physical momentum.
Yes. It translates into steadfast physical action, supreme battlefield discipline, and unwavering, organized submission to the Markaz.
Wow.
Parwez frames Iman as structural courage. It is the psychological anchor that allows an individual to replace the paralyzing fear of worldly forces, whether that's an enemy army, economic ruin, or social ostracization, with absolute structural resolve.
So for you listening right now, think about what it actually takes to hold your ground when an overwhelming, heavily armed force is bearing down on you and every biological instinct is screaming at you to run.
It's terrifying.
You can't survive that with a vague mystical hope. That requires a hyper-focused unity of purpose.
And the text calls this tawhid.
Right. Now, in a Mazhab, tawhid just means believing there is only one God rather than three or four.
Right, it's just a numbers game in that context.
But in Deen, tawhid is the singular, undivided synchronization of your personal purpose with the collective survival and advancement of the society.
You are one gear in a massive unified machine spinning with absolute conviction.
And it's incredibly easy to claim you have that structural courage when you are sitting safely in the cloister.
Oh, anyone can be brave in a cloister.
Right. It is very easy to theorize about tawhid in times of peace. But that unity of purpose is utterly meaningless until it is tested in the crucible of the real world.
And that is exactly why Parwez focuses so relentlessly on the Battle of Uhud. Uhud is where the theory of Deen hits the absolute unforgiving reality of human nature.
Okay, so let's set the scene for this crucible. We are looking specifically at verses 152 to 155 of Surah Al-Imran.
Right.
The battle is Uhud. The nascent, structurally unified state, the Milat, is facing a massive, heavily equipped, numerically superior enemy army.
This is an existential threat.
If the Milat loses here, the entire blueprint of universal justice is wiped off the map forever. So the central authority, the Markaz, sets up this brilliant, highly disciplined strategic defense.
He identifies a critical vulnerability.
Right, a mountain pass that the enemy cavalry could use to flank them. So he places a dedicated faction of archers on that hill with one absolute, non-negotiable directive. Do not leave this post under any circumstances.
Right. Whether we are routing the enemy or being slaughtered, you hold this line. You are the structural anchor.
It is a perfect test of exactly what we just discussed, right? Iman is at battlefield discipline and submission to the Markaz.
Exactly. And initially, the strategy works flawlessly.
Yeah.
Ayat 152 explicitly notes this. It says that as long as the collective operated strictly according to the systemic rules, they were achieving total victory. The enemy was breaking formation. They were routing. The system was proving its superiority.
But then the unthinkable happens.
Yeah, a catastrophic systemic breach occurs from within.
The enemy is fleeing in panic, and as they run, they leave behind their gear, their supplies, their wealth.
In the context of the time, this is life-changing wealth scattered on the desert floor, the spoils of war.
And the archers on the hill, the ones who were given the absolute order to hold the line, they look down. They see the gold, the armor, the absolute abundance of immediate material wealth.
And they flinch.
The psychological anchor snaps. They begin to dispute the clear directive of the Markaz. And the vast majority of them completely abandon their strategic posts to run down the hill and grab the loot before it's all gone.
This is the exact moment Parwez drills into with intense scrutiny.
Yeah, because it changes everything.
Because if we treat this as just a historical military blunder, we miss the entire sociopolitical lesson of the text.
Right.
Parwez breaks down the underlying devastating psychology of this breach. He argues that in that moment, the archers violently shifted their cognitive focus.
Away from the collective.
Yes. They shifted away from the supreme long-term socio-political objective of establishing a just society, which the text calls Akhira,
Right.
and they hyper-focused entirely on immediate individualistic material gain, which is known as dunya.
Okay, I want to pause and really emphasize that because it is a massive conceptual shift.
It really is.
In traditional religious circles, we constantly hear dunya and akhira translated as this physical world and the magical afterlife.
Right, the literal heaven and hell.
People are told to ignore the dunya so they can go to a literal heaven, the akhira, after they die.
Yeah.
But Parwez is throwing that out completely.
Completely.
He is translating them as economic and psychological concepts occurring right here, right now. Dunya is short-term, immediate gratification. Akhira is the long-term systemic vision of a sustainable, just civilization.
Exactly. It brings these lofty concepts crashing down into the practical, operational realm. The archers traded the permanent structural security of their entire civilization for a temporary, selfish payout. And Parwez drops one of his most profound insights here. He states that this functional disobedience, this prioritizing of personal wealth over the collective mission, was actually a functional form of shirk.
Wait, shirk.
Yes.
Because usually, if you ask anyone what shirk is, they will tell you it means polytheism.
Yes.
Like it means carving a statue out of wood or stone and physically bowing down to it. You're telling me running for the spoils of war is shirk?
Traditionally, yes, people think of it as idol worship, but functionally, within the systemic framework of Deen, shirk simply means a divided purpose.
Okay, so it's the opposite of tawhid.
Exactly. It means compromising the singular objective of the state by introducing a competing authority. In this case, the competing authority was their own ego, their own greed.
Ah, I see.
By turning their gaze away from the collective mission and toward individual wealth, the archers shattered the unity of the millet. They weren't worshiping a literal wooden idol on that hill.
They were worshiping their own immediate economic self-interest.
Exactly. And by doing so, they shattered the social contract.
To use a modern analogy, it's like being on a competitive rowing team in a massive, turbulent river.
Oh, that's a good one.
You all have to row in perfect synchronization, trusting the coxswain who is calling the rhythm. If you do, you cut through the water and survive the rapids.
Right.
But suddenly, half the boat sees $100 bills floating in the water. They decide they'd rather use their oars to fish for cash than propel the boat. What happens?
The rhythm is destroyed.
The boat turns sideways and it capsizes. Everyone drowns, including the people who grab the money.
Yeah, the money doesn't save them.
And that is exactly the physics of what happens at Uhud. The enemy cavalry, which was retreating, sees the abandoned mountain pass. They realize the structural anchor is gone. They loop around, secure the high ground, and attack the Milat from the rear.
It's devastating.
In an instant, a flawless victory turns into an absolute bloody slaughter.
Which brings us to the profound psychological analysis in Ayat 153 and 154. Parwez details the immediate fallout of this indiscipline. The text doesn't just describe a military loss, it describes a state of absolute sheer cognitive chaos.
Like total panic.
Panic sets in like a virus. The structural discipline completely evaporates. Soldiers are fleeing wildly, ignoring the calls of the commander, prioritizing their individual self-preservation over the integrity of the state.
Wow.
The Quran describes this resulting condition with a haunting phrase, sorrow upon sorrow.
Sorrow upon sorrow. It's the ultimate nightmare scenario. Not just the sorrow of physical defeat, but the crushing existential sorrow of knowing you brought it upon yourselves because of a moment of greed.
Yeah, that internal guilt.
But here, right at the epicenter of this catastrophe, is where the concept of the markaz, the central authority, proves its necessity. Amidst this catastrophic rout, while the entire social structure is literally bleeding out and everyone else is running for their lives, the Rasul does not run.
No, he doesn't.
Parwez emphasizes that he stands immovably firm in the center of the carnage, continuously calling out, trying to reorganize the fractured, panicked army. He is the ultimate operational anchor.
And Parwez argues that this crisis, this unimaginable chaos, actually serves a vital, inescapable function. The battlefield becomes a societal filter. It acts as a smelting furnace.
So a disaster like Uhud isn't just a tragic military loss, it's a societal audit.
A societal audit, yes.
It strips away all the public relations, all the theoretical talk from the cloister, and it shows you exactly who is actually committed to the systemic blueprint and who is just wearing the uniform hoping for an easy paycheck.
That is the perfect way to frame it. The furnace separates pure conviction from hypocrisy.
Right.
Ayat 154 points out a fascinating psychological phenomenon.
But
For the true believers, the ones who possessed actual iman, even in the midst of this terrifying disaster, the act of adhering to the markaz organically generated psychological tranquility.
wow, even while losing.
Yes. They found cognitive stability not by running away, but by rallying back to the system. The structure provided peace. But the crisis simultaneously exposed a hidden, incredibly dangerous faction within the society, the hypocrites.
This introduces the concept of nifaq, or hypocrisy.
Right.
If we go back to our operating system analogy, if Iman is the core programming that keeps the system running, nifaq is like deeply embedded malware.
Oh, exactly. It's a virus.
It looks like a normal program on the surface, but when the system is under stress, it executes a malicious code that shuts everything down.
Yes. The hypocrites revealed their true individualistic nature the moment the system stopped providing them with easy victories.
Those fair weather fans.
Exactly. While the true believers were rallying back to the markaz to stop the bleeding, the hypocrites were paralyzed by anxiety, worrying only about their own physical safety and political standing.
Unbelievable.
The text actually quotes their internal grumbling. They say, "Is there anything for us in this matter?" They are actively questioning the systemic authority of the state, demanding a sharing command, and harboring deeply ignorant, skeptical thoughts about the validity of the entire system.
They're essentially standing in the middle of a massacre they helped cause by breaking discipline, and they're asking management, so what's my cut?
Yeah, what's in it for me?
What's in it for me? Why did I even sign up for this if I'm not getting paid a dividend today? It's the ultimate expression of the dunya mindset.
It is, and Parwez points out a harsh but necessary reality. These existential struggles are actually required for a society to mature.
You view the test.
You do.
Huh.
Crises purge the collective of these individualistic elements. You cannot build a durable, multi-generational civilization if a significant portion of your society is operating with malware.
Right.
If they will abandon the long-term mission the moment they spot a pile of gold or face a real physical threat, the furnace burns away the impurities.
Okay, I am going to push back here. Let me just play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah, go for it.
I want to really challenge the core premise of this blueprint, because we keep circling around the same central flaw. The archers ran for the spoils of war. They broke the entire system for gold. That is greed.
Yes, it is.
And greed isn't just a weird quirk of the people at Uhud. It's a fundamental, seemingly biological human flaw. We see it today in every corporate structure, in every political system, in every economic crash. Greed is undefeated.
It's everywhere.
So how does this textual blueprint actually solve the underlying issue of human greed? Does the Quran just point its finger, say be better people, and hope for the best? Because history shows that moralizing to people about greed never ever works. If there's wealth on the hill, people will run for it.
This is perhaps the most crucial question we can ask, and it is exactly where the profound socioeconomic genius of Parwez's framework emerges. You are absolutely right. Moralizing does not work.
It just doesn't.
You cannot preach away human instinct. The text does not rely on moralizing. It relies on cold, hard, structural economics.
Okay, explain that.
Parwez details what the Quran calls Nizam-e-Rubiyat, which translates to the system of providence or the system of universal sustenance.
The actual economic engine of the Deen.
Precisely. In the Nizam-e-Rubiyat, the markaz acts as the ultimate structural guarantor of universal sustenance for every single individual in the society.
So everyone gets what they need.
Everyone. Every man, woman, and child is guaranteed their basic needs: food, shelter, security, healthcare, education, not as a charity, but as a fundamental constitutional right provided by the state.
But how? How does the state afford to achieve this massive undertaking?
By strictly, uncompromisingly forbidding surplus wealth, or in the specific context of the battle, the spoils of war, mali ghanima, from becoming individual plunder.
Wait. So under the actual rules of the system, those archers weren't even supposed to be allowed to keep that loot in the first place, even if they had waited until the battle was officially over.
Exactly. That is the tragedy of their indiscipline. The structural rule of the Deen was that all spoils of war, all captured resources, and broadly speaking, all surplus wealth generated by the society must be centralized into the state treasury, known as the Beit ul-Mal.
Okay.
From that centralized hub, the wealth is distributed equitably according to the collective needs of the entire Milat. The system physically prevents a scenario where a few powerful individuals hoard mountains of wealth, while the marginalized starve.
Okay, I have to stop you there because I can hear the objections screaming through the headphones of anyone listening right now.
I know exactly what they're going to say.
They're going to say, look, if I risk my actual life on the battlefield, or if in modern terms I work 80 hours a week building a massive company and innovating, shouldn't I reap the direct, immediate, disproportionate rewards of that effort?
The classic capitalist argument.
Right. Isn't centralizing all that surplus wealth into a state treasury just going to completely kill human motivation? It sounds like a tragedy of the commons. If I don't get to keep the gold, I'm not going to fight the enemy. If I don't get to keep the profits, I'm not going to innovate. How does this blueprint address our deeply ingrained capitalist instincts?
It addresses them by diagnosing the root cause of that instinct. Ask yourself, why do humans hoard wealth? Why are we desperate for the immediate, disproportionate reward?
Because we want security.
We hoard because we are terrified of scarcity. We hoard because we live in deeply unjust systems where if you fall sick or if you lose your job or if you get old, the system will gladly let you starve in the street.
That's entirely true.
Your private bank account is the only armor you have against a ruthless world, so of course you want to hoard the spoils of war. Parwez argues that the Quranic text is fundamentally banning systemic mechanisms of individual profiteering because they inevitably compromise the survival of the whole by keeping everyone in a state of traumatized competition.
Wow. So the system of Deen is actually designed to cure the trauma of scarcity.
Yes. If your motivation is solely individual hoarding, you will always abandon your posts, literally or metaphorically, when a better offer comes along, even if it destroys the broader society.
That makes so much sense.
Verses 157 and 158 make it explicitly clear. Hoarding wealth while avoiding collective struggles or keeping your wealth out of the Beit al-Mal is deemed entirely worthless in the grand scheme.
Right.
The ultimate goal is adl, which means absolute structural justice, and rubiyat, universal sustenance. When the state flawlessly ensures that no one is left behind, your personal security is no longer tied to the size of your private bank account. It is tied entirely to the collective security of the state.
That is a staggering psychological pivot. The motivation shifts entirely. Instead of waking up and thinking, I need to hoard as much wealth as possible today so I don't starve tomorrow, you wake up and think, I need to support and defend this socioeconomic system with everything I have. Because this system structurally guarantees that I and my children and my neighbors will never, ever starve. It's shifting a civilization from a scarcity mindset driven by paralyzing fear to an abundance mindset driven by structural justice.
That is the exact psychological evolution the Nizam-e-Rububiyya aims to achieve. It replaces the anxiety of capitalism with the peace of universal provision. But as Uhud proves, when a society fails to uphold that system, when individuals revert to the primal instinct of greed and attempt to hoard the spoils, the consequences are not just spiritual. The consequences are immediate, physical, and severe.
Which brings us to a fascinating point about consequence and how we interpret disaster.
Yes.
When a society suffers a massive, devastating loss, like the slaughter at Uhud, or in modern times an economic collapse, a massive infrastructure failure, or a pandemic, the traditional religious assumption is almost always, God was angry with us.
You hear this
Constantly. A hurricane hits a coastline, and some televangelist says it's because of sin. An army loses a battle, and the priest says, we didn't pray hard enough, this is divine punishment.
Yeah.
So how does Parwez's rationalist framework interpret the massacre at Uhud? Because a lot of people died. Did God send the enemy cavalry to punish the archers?
Parwez completely dismantles that superstitious framing. He reframes the entire concept of divine punishment through what the Quran calls the Law of Requital, or mukafati amal.
The social physics of the universe.
Exactly. It's about immutable cause and effect in human society, just like gravity in the physical world. The disaster at Uhud was not an arbitrary lightning bolt of divine wrath.
God didn't just throw a tantrum.
Right. God didn't suddenly get emotional, lose his temper, and magically orchestrate a punishment. The slaughter was the natural, physical, and entirely unavoidable consequence of strategic indiscipline and materialism.
It's causality. If you are defending a fortress and you intentionally leave the back door wide open so you can go pick up some loose coins off the street, the enemy is going to walk through that door and burn the fortress down.
It's not magic.
Right. It's not an angry deity. It's just the physical reality of leaving a door open in a war zone.
Precisely. Turning one's back on the collective mission physically and inevitably leads to systemic destruction. The sorrow upon sorrow they experienced was the scientific, calculable result of their own actions.
And the flip side must be true too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The flip side of the law of requital is also true. What traditionalists might mystically call angelic help or miraculous divine intervention during a victory is actually the psychological tranquility, the high morale, and the unbreakable structural fortitude that organically arises when a society strictly adheres to a just, disciplined system.
The miracle is the efficiency of the machine working perfectly. That makes an incredible amount of sense, and it strips away the victim mentality. You can't just weep and say, God willed it, when you were the one who broke the formation.
You have to take responsibility.
And it really brings to light this razor-sharp observation Parwez makes regarding Ayat 156. The text aggressively condemns a very specific, risk-averse mindset that bubbled up after the defeat.
Yeah, this is a really important point.
It calls out the people who, standing amidst the casualties, said, if they had just stayed home with us, if they hadn't gone out to fight this massive army, they wouldn't have been killed.
Right.
It's that ultra-conservative escapist mentality that says true safety is found by hiding from the world. It's the voice of the Mazhab saying, let's just stay in the mosque.
And here is where Parwez's analysis fundamentally redefines the concept of life itself, which the Quran calls hayat. This is a profound philosophical pillar of his framework.
Okay, unpack hayat for us.
The lecture explains that in this Quranic socioeconomic system, true life isn't merely the biological act of breathing. It isn't just having a beating heart and a functioning metabolism. Right.
I mean, a plant breathes. An animal has a beating heart. That is not hayat for a human being.
So what is true life then? How does the blueprint define it?
True life is defined by MLL constructive, purposeful action taken to establish the divine order and universal justice in the physical world. It is the active, continuous struggle to dismantle tyranny.
So it requires action.
Yes. Therefore, hiding from existential risks simply to preserve your physical breath, locking your doors and ignoring the suffering of the world just to ensure you don't get hurt, is considered a state of living death.
Wow.
It creates a society of perpetual internal subjugation, cowardice, and endless regret.
So avoiding the struggle doesn't mean you saved your life. It means you completely wasted it. You are functionally just a breathing corpse if you aren't contributing to the collective fight against systemic falsehoods.
That's exactly it. That is a heavy, incredibly challenging idea for anyone listening. It means our educational systems, our cultural institutions, and our personal goals shouldn't be geared toward just finding a safe, quiet, wealthy corner of the world to exist in while the world burns.
Right. We shouldn't be training our kids to just keep their heads down.
Exactly. We should be training society to proactively tackle global dangers, to take calculated structural risks, to uphold universal rights.
It demands an active, courageous, and often dangerous engagement with reality. It is the ultimate rejection of retreating into the cloisters of private rituals. You cannot establish adult justice from the safety of a meditation cushion.
Okay, this is brilliant, but it brings everything full circle for me, and I need to know how the blueprint resolves the immediate crisis.
Okay.
We've established that the archers broke the rules, they gave in to greed, they caused a catastrophic structural failure, they triggered the unforgiving natural law of requital, and they got a lot of their own people killed.
Yeah, it was a disaster.
So what happens to them now? The battle is over. Does the Marquez, the central authority, just line them up for a firing squad for desertion? Do they cast them out into the desert to starve? Because we just established that this is a strict, disciplined state system. How does a functioning, rational state handle massive, lethal human error without reverting to tyranny?
This is perhaps one of the most profound and sophisticated insights from Parwez's entire lecture, and it is covered in Ayat 155. It introduces the systemic attribute of halim, which generally translates to forbearance.
Forbearance, like the ability to hold back?
Yeah.
Restraint?
Yes, but with a very specific structural nuance.
Yeah.
Parwez uses a striking cultural metaphor here to illustrate how the state operates. He compares the attribute of halim to a massively powerful camel that is sitting peacefully on the ground.
A camel.
Yes, children might be playing around it, they might be throwing pebbles at it, pulling its hair, shouting, generally being a nuisance. The camel is a massive beast. It possesses the raw physical power to stand. But it doesn't. It remains completely unbothered by the trivial annoyances because it is entirely secure in its own immense strength.
Right. It knows its strength is absolute, so it doesn't need to fly into a rage over every minor provocation. It doesn't need to prove its dominance by crushing a child.
Exactly. Parwez applies this to the divine system and the Markaz. The state possesses absolute centralized power. It has the authority and the physical capability to execute the archers, but instead it exercises immense institutional forbearance.
Wow.
This concept completely dismantles the traditional view of a wrathful deity flying into a rage and demanding blood over every human mistake.
Okay, I have to push back on the camel analogy, though.
Sure.
A child pulling a camel's hair is a nuisance.
Mm.
Abandoning a strategic military post and causing a massacre of your own comrades isn't a trivial annoyance. It's a massive, catastrophic betrayal. It's a huge deal.
You are absolutely right. It is a massive deal.
Yeah.
But the system of Deen makes a crucial, hyper-rational distinction regarding intent and human nature.
Intent matters.
Very much so. The archer's action was a severe tactical error, what Islamic jurisprudence calls an ijtihadi mistake. It was an error in judgment born of sudden, overwhelming psychological temptation.
Okay.
It was a momentary lapse in discipline caused by the sudden appearance of wealth. What it was not, crucially, was deliberate treason.
Ah.
It was not a calculated, premeditated rebellion aimed at overthrowing the Markaz or dismantling the state.
Ah, I see. They were weak in that specific moment. They suffered a cognitive fracture. But they weren't enemy spies, and they weren't trying to orchestrate a coup against the system itself.
Precisely. The system recognizes the difference between human frailty and malicious treason. And because of that critical distinction, the state is designed to absorb the shock.
That's incredible.
Ayat 155 explicitly states that they are forgiving. But Parwez is careful to clarify. This isn't a mystical feel-good pardon so their souls can go to heaven. It is a highly pragmatic, structural policy of systemic forgiveness, known as afwa.
It's restorative justice on a civilizational scale.
Yes, restorative justice. And it is absolutely crucial for the long-term survival of any state. Minor strategic errors, administrative failures, or lapses in human discipline must be systematically corrected, analyzed, and then forgiven.
They have to be given a second chance.
Yes. The ultimate goal of the state is to rehabilitate its human resources. It needs to retrain them, rebuild their psychological anchors, and reintegrate them into the milad, rather than permanently discarding them or executing them.
That makes the system so much stronger.
Exactly. This policy of offload provides a confident, stable, psychologically safe environment. It means individuals can take bold actions, learn from their inevitable failures, and prepare for future sociopolitical struggles without the paralyzing, suffocating fear of being executed for a single human mistake. It builds resilience instead of terror.
Wow. Okay, let's just take a breath and synthesize all of this, because the journey we've just taken through Parwez's rationalist lens is simply incredible.
It really is a paradigm shift.
We started with a physical text that society has conditioned us to treat merely as a religious placeholder, something to chant at weddings or funerals for mystical blessings.
The act.
The app. But by stripping away the vocabulary that priesthood, we've seen it completely transformed into a highly engineered, fiercely pragmatic blueprint for a unified state.
The operating system.
The operating system. We've seen that macroeconomics, military discipline, wealth distribution, and social justice are completely inseparable from what we used to call spirituality. We learned that the ultimate value of a human life isn't found in hoarding wealth in a private bank account or hiding from the dangers of the world in a cloister.
Right.
True life, Hayat, is found in expending your energy as a vital, integrated asset for the advancement of the collective society, the millet.
It entirely redefines the human experience. It changes what it means to lead, what it means to have conviction, and what it means to truly actively live in the physical world.
It really does. It leaves no room for apathy, but it also leaves me, and I'm sure you listening right now, with a pretty intense, haunting thought to chew on as we wrap up.
Indeed. If we connect today's deep dive on Surah Al-Imran to the broader, overarching implications of Parwez's lecture series, we are left with a deeply provocative question.
Go ahead.
Today, we clearly establish the baseline. True life is the constructive, often dangerous, physical struggle to establish universal justice. We learned that hiding in the false safety of escapism and private rituals is, structurally and scientifically speaking, a living death.
Yeah.
But consider the reality of our modern world.
Right.
What if a society has already fully embraced that living death?
What do you mean?
What if an entire collective civilization has completely retreated into the cloisters of Mazhab, obsessing over the exact physical postures of their private rituals, while completely ignoring the worldly tyrannies, the economic exploitation, and the systemic injustice raging just outside their doors?
Oh.
If the millet is already in a coma, what is the exact systemic mechanism required to wake them up? How do you force a dead collective to breathe again?
How do you jumpstart the heart of a civilization that is actively forgotten it's supposed to be alive?
Exactly.
What is the shock to the system that breaks the ritual trap once and for all? That is the precise, radical catalyst we're going to have to explore in our next deep dive.
Thank you for joining us today, for challenging your deepest assumptions, and for exploring the underlying code of this blueprint with us. Keep questioning the systems around you, keep actively learning, and remember, sometimes the most powerful practical instructions for changing the real world are hiding in the very texts you were told were just meant for the next one.